Hello everybody, I'm Alexey Kraborov, the organizer of SF Scala, and here we're on location at TradeShift, where we have an awesome meetup about microservices. We have two talks today, and one of the talks is from Lightband, and here with us we have Jamie Allen. He's the Senior Director of Global Services at Lightband, which until recently was known as TypeSafe. And obviously everybody's curious, so maybe I'll just jump right into it and I'll ask Jamie, why Lightband? What does Lightband mean?
Okay, well, one of the things that we found about our name, aside from the fact that people would typically call us Typeface, was that it didn't convey anything to the executive stakeholders that we were trying to market to. When you're a company that's trying to build a business around selling technology to executives, it has to be a name that means something to them. And whenever we would go to a conference like Gartner Group, they have something in Las Vegas called AADI. I don't even know what it stands for. But we'd stand there in our booth and people would walk by and look at us and say, TypeSafe. And then they'd walk away. And they thought that we made something like a tool to help them type better or fonts. And that's not good. But more importantly, one of the things we realized about our name was that it bounded us. It said that we believe this. And while we are firm believers that type safety is critical in building, correct software, who knows what the future holds? So we didn't want to put a boundary around ourselves and say that this is all we do. And really, if you look at the technologies we produce now, not all of them are fully type safe. So this isn't a great descriptive name of what we want to be. And so we thought about how we could rebrand ourselves in a way that was non-constrictive. And that's where Lightband came from. The idea that it's an aspirational name, and it sounds like nonsense, but it really does have a meaning to us in that we're trying to create technologies that bring the world to the way we think. And whether or not we're right, we'll see. But we have ideals about how software should be built. And we think that we're a gravitational force in the world to kind of bring people to our way of thinking.
I think it's kind of, since the time it was introduced, I kind of found that it kind of grows on me, right? And it's actually, it's a very good explanation. I think it's kind of interesting because, type safety is one of the things Scala community believes it's very important. Another is functional programming, right? And but I think the overarching belief is that we deeply care about software engineering. We have experience-based knowledge what the best practices are,
right.
And we want to bring people to work with us using this best practice. So it's an interesting way to put this, right? So you emphasize that gravitational pull, right? Which is very, so tell us a little bit about your career. I know that you're one of the guys at Lightband who most meetings with actual customers. You you see what people are doing, right? You know how Scala is used in practice. So you actually do a lot for actual promotion of Akka and Scala use in industry.
Yes.
And so I wonder, right, how that influences your thinking. What do you see? What kind of trends? Can you just tell us a little bit, about kind of your career in the industry and how do you see trends? How do you operate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think historically, I've been with TypeSafe Lightband now for 4 years, actually, on April 1st, on this auspicious day.
Congratulations.
But thank you. We have seen a complete transformation in the kind of companies that we work with now. There are the early adopters out there, the LinkedIns, the Apple, and a lot of them are technology focused. And then there are people in the financial sector. We see Morgan Stanley is a really big proponent of Scala. You see Goldman Sachs being one of the companies sponsoring Scala Center. So finance companies are very quick to find technologies that help them solve problems, and they adopt them quickly. But in the enterprise, for the larger companies that are traditionally a little less risk willing, right? They have started coming to us in droves, and now it's a matter of trying to help them all in a way that is meaningful. And it's really tough. It's actually changing the way that we do business. One of the things that I'm going to be taking on more and more is a role of strategic enablement, where companies who are saying, we want to go with this technology all the way. We want everything to be everything that we do going forward to be with this kind of approach. And whenever I go in there and I talk to people, I don't even preface it with the whole, here's us, here's what we do. It's more the philosophies, the ideals that we're trying to get people to believe in. And once they see that and they grasp them and they embrace them, then we see them, want to go this path all the way. And that's going to be my goal going forward, is helping companies, be successful holistically, not just with a proof of concept or a single one-off or anything like that. It'll be much more about strategic enablement.
So who is the audience? So usually when you come into a company, who do you talk to? Is it kind of senior architect, chief architect? Is it VP of engineering? Is it the CTO? So who is the decision maker on the other end?
Well, historically, it's always been, we've had a champion, somebody who really believed in what we were doing and was bringing us into that company. And then there are certain companies who see this, in very segmented companies who don't work as an entire team. One group will adopt something, another group will adopt something. That's been very scattershot for us. But now, with the people that we're talking to, it's been much more executive stakeholders, the CIO levels. And whenever I say this, I mean, for the largest companies on the internet as far as enterprise goes. I mean, you can talk about Amazon and stuff like that, and they do use our stuff. But whenever I'm talking about, say, big hotel chains, right, retailers, companies that do a lot of Internet of Things because they create so many devices like GE or Samsung. We're certainly talking to the people at the highest levels of those companies. IBM is an excellent example of this. IBM has fully bought into our platform, and we're now training hundreds of their people, and we're building all these videos for them. They're such big proponents of Spark, and they want people to use Spark from Scala. So this is super exciting for us.
Yeah, it's I think IBM kind of joining Spark ecosystem and kind of realizing Scala benefit through it. I think it's really huge for the community, right? Because like we previously seen IBM back in Java and back in Linux, right? So it puts Spark in the same league.
Exactly. It's the third big push they've done of a strategic nature. And if you look at what they're doing, it's really impressive because they're not just saying we're believers in Spark, they're investing in it. They have a team of people here in San Francisco working at the Spark TC, and their entire job is to harden Spark.
Yes.
Build out the documentation, write the tests, make sure that all of the comments are in the code, and also contribute real fixes that make this more powerful. So when you have an entity like IBM behind you, technology can't help but be successful as far as being marketed out to the enterprise community, and it lowers that risk barrier for adoption.
Yeah. So the kind of the one of the core messages of Type Safe Lightband is reactive systems, reactive platform.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit for those folks who are not familiar with this terminology? What is reactive? Why is it important in the enterprise? And basically, how are you aligning this new vision for the company to basically bring reactive to the world?
Right. Well, we started out with the ideals that we wanted people to embrace, and that was the the concepts of being responsive to whatever clients you have, whether they're users or B2B or whenever you're receiving information from Fitbits, and that all is driven by being able to scale up and down, being elastic to all the different events that can occur inside of your world, but also being resilient and not losing things just because something went wrong at the hardware level, or all those things that you really can't even type check. And we feel that underpinning everything to make that successful is a message-driven approach. And it's very easy to get our head around as developers because I don't know very many people who haven't coded against a message queue like a MQ series from IBM or ActiveMQ or RabbitMQ or even think in terms of Kafka, right?
Which is mostly widespread message bus used, I think, in startups.
Yeah, it's certainly in the startups, but also in the enterprise as well. I mean, huge numbers of enterprises are using Kafka now. This is a great way to buffer all the load that's coming into you before you consume it. And that allows you to think in terms of, well, given that it's in some sort of queue, it doesn't matter who the consumer is. Anybody, any server, any service can grab that data and do work with it. And that enables the elasticity, it enables the resilience, and that leads to the responsive experience that we want. So that's where we started. And now that people have embraced those notions, we're moving more into this idea of, okay, how do we do it fast? How do we take that data and really quickly make decisions? And we see this with customers in some really unique spaces, like online gaming. And by that I mean gambling, or whenever you're placing a bet. William Hill in the UK, they have a tremendous business around this, where they have to immediately make decisions to be profitable based upon the odds that they're offering people who are placing a bet on a horse or a game or whatever. But also in the financial space, because that has to happen in real time. You've got to know your risk profile.
Yeah.
So this is how people make money. And so Dean Wampler has been really instrumental in helping define this canonical architecture of how we believe systems should be written to handle fast data while still meeting these reactive principles.
Interesting. And so Dean is also driving the big data agenda for Lightbend, right? And so he's a champion of Spark. So I wonder, how do you see Spark and reactive interact?
I see them as sort of orthogonal concerns, in that Spark is merely a mechanism through which you get access to information. Right? You have all this data coming at you. You've got to make sense of it. So the whole idea is you use Spark to perform any kind of anomaly detection, or just supervised models where you have a trained model that knows that based upon historical data, I can categorize it a certain way and therefore make assumptions that it will hold true in so many percentage of a case. Like 90% of the time, this will hold true, and therefore make business decisions in real time automatically, as opposed to having people try and figure that out on the fly based on charts they see.
So I'm wondering, how do you kind of see the Lightbend strategy in the enterprise? So you unveiled the Lagom microservices platform, which you're going to describe today in the technical talk.
Yes.
But obviously kind of, and that's Java first, right? So, and now, so you kind of, you obviously were the biggest fish in the Scala pond.
Yeah.
And you will be pretty medium-sized fish in the Java pond.
Yes.
When you start, right? But you've been in this industry for many years, so you know the Java side of things. Yeah. So I wonder, how do you see this idea that kind of Lightbend is going to compete in the bigger JVM world, basing on its Scala advantage, on the advantage which Akka encapsulates?
Yeah.
How do you see this strategy unfolding in the enterprise?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I think, speaking historically, we have at our company, enterprise customers mostly, right? And these are companies who are trying to move into this space at a time when there's a big paradigm shift for their developers. And it's a lot for people to ingest and try and think about asynchrony, non-blocking, concurrency, parallelism, forking and joining, and how I'm going to build, acyclic graphs of all this information and stuff like that. It's difficult, right? And so a lot of them make the choice to say, I want to start with Java because I don't want to throw a new language in there as well. Now, at Lightbend, we're obviously huge proponents of Scala, and we think that it's definitely a step forward in application development using a language. But that said, we can't ignore this market, and historically we have. If you look at the conferences that are available for people using Play Framework or Akka, they're all in Scala. If you look at even Spark usage, how does somebody using Java find out information about Spark? And this is an area where we have to make up ground for the rest of the world. We have these customers. They need to be successful. We can't ignore them. So they have to be first-class citizens.
Yes.
And I think one of the things about our announcement of Lightbend and Lagom that was difficult for the Scala community to embrace was, here we came out guns blazing for the Java side of the house. But we'd ignored them for so long. It was all 100% Scala.
Yes.
Where 50% of our users are Java.
That's right.
So there's a big disparity between what we're doing to help people as opposed to what our actual customer profile looks like. So we have to help those people. There will be a conference this year in Austin in October focused around using these technologies from Java, so that there is a voice and also a place where people can send their teams to learn.
Yes.
And that's going to be really important. That said, we think that Scala is a linchpin for innovation. We see this with all the great frameworks that are coming out now. You do not see this kind of innovation happening with Java or other languages.
Yep.
People are doing more with big data using Scala than they are with any other language. And that includes Python. There's incredible libraries available in Python for doing computation.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean the engines exist for doing this at scale.
Correct. At the core level, it's mostly at the user level.
Exactly.
And I think you're right in terms of big data space. We did the Big Data Scala conference last August, and it was Mike Olson was there, Matej Zacharia was there, Jay Krebs was there, Martin himself keynoted with a message that basically Spark is a Scala DSL, which I think is signifying the development. When I was kind of thinking about this, I actually thought that there is something you can teach the Scala community, and I think this lightband development is really great. And you, as kind of interfacing with businesses, also can really teach Scala businesses a lot, right? Because essentially, and I want to run this by you, and I wonder what your thoughts are. So I used to work for Amazon, and at Amazon, what struck me is that every engineer thinks as a business owner. Engineers are very business-like because they make decisions. Essentially, they want to satisfy their customers.
Right.
So if you see that customer's order is stuck in a queue, you are proactively doing whatever it takes to unblock this customer's order, right? And kind of so without any regard for hierarchy or whatever. So if an engineer thinks as a business owner, great things happen, and Amazon kind of is evidence of this, right? So you guys really found a niche where you can take the Scala goodness, wrap it into a Java API, put it in front of businesses, see adoption, and see growing market share. So I think this is actually good for Scala ecosystem in general.
It is,
right? And it's because it lets you sell more Scala-based services.
It does.
Right? It lets you have more Scala jobs and build more Scala systems if they expose APIs to kind of 90% of the world is using already, right? You're on JVM already.
Yeah.
So I wonder, if this is actually a good model for basically software engineering shops using Scala, because you don't need to be lightband to do this, right? You can be any kind of consultancy who happen to have smart engineers who believe in the way they architect systems, but since you already are on JVM and you can expose Java APIs, you can go after businesses where they traditionally have been Java shops, right? So do you think this strategy is transferable, and kind of can you guys teach the rest of Scala world, let them in on the fun, right? Let them all make more money with this.
I think that's true, and there's an opportunity for the Java side of the world as well. We see this already actually in Spark with the data frames API, where you see the type level people building this incredible new API DSL for type safety, because data frames use a lot of stringly typed arguments, where you're just passing in strings that you cannot be type checked, and at runtime you find out whether you mistyped something. So that's totally unacceptable as far as API design goes for people who care about soundness and correctness whenever they're building a system that has to go into production. They don't want to find out 3 hours after they put something out there that it's wrong. So you see the Scala community already moving to build an API for data frames that is type safe. And I think somebody who's really crafty could be doing the exact same thing for Java. Right? It's not that there isn't type safety in Java. It may not be as stringent as what you can achieve in Scala, but that doesn't mean that there isn't value.
Right.
And if you look at Logom, because we came out with it with Java first, I mean, a lot of that is also very practical. It's a lesson learned from having acquired Play framework and acquired Spray framework that it was difficult for us to then take those frameworks and just move them to a Java API. You couldn't just bolt something on.
Yes.
And so for Logom in particular, we really wanted to make sure that we built a fluid Java API, and then we can do amazing things with Scala for Scala API, but we had to make sure Java was right first, right? So that was a really critical aspect for us.
Cool. So I think this is very interesting, and I mean, Play was available in Java, right, already. So
Play 1, yes.
Play 1, that's right. So you guys kind of in a good position to straddle this both worlds, and so in terms of microservices, obviously it's on everybody's mind, right? And it just occurred to me. I mean, I've lived to see and do some Corba. And I just thought, what is, didn't Corba invent everything that microservices are inventing now? What is crucial, what is different this time around, right? We had kind of many goals at this thing. And obviously, Akka is a very powerful piece of software. and also you guys are coming out with Lagom, and they also have Conductor,
Yes.
which was not discussed a lot, but I'm really impressed by what it can do. So can you talk a little
You're
bit?
using it at Nitro, right?
We looked at it, right?
Okay.
So, but it's kind of it's new, right?
Yes.
So how can you kind of what is your vision for microservices from Lightband side? How Lagom, Akka, Conductor play together, and like what is the differentiation?
Right.
What is the key difference here, which can be the goodness Lightband brings to this space?
Right. I think two things, right? First of all, one thing that I think has historically been completely ignored by framework builders on the JVM is developer experience, right? It's incredibly hard to build just a simple RESTful API using the traditional tools of Jersey and whatever frameworks you want to use. You got to patch them all together, and there's just it's awful to build up a war and then have to figure out how you're going to hot deploy or using JRebel or something like that, or maybe you don't. Maybe you take the server down, replace the war, bring it back up, all that kind of garbage, and that slows people down. And let's face it, it's not fun. So one of the critical things for us was Play Framework has a really great developer experience when you're building web apps.
Yes.
Right. You've got the ability to sit there and in your browser just hit F5, refresh the browser, and you see the compile errors, right?
Yep.
And you don't have to worry about anything about whether the code is pulled into the server or anything like that. It's all taken care of for you. We wanted to bring that exact same experience to people who were developing RESTful APIs that don't have a front end, right? That don't have some sort of user interface that you see. And while you're coding, you save, it's automatically redeploying it for you in your development environment. So you can test whether or not this is going to work really easily with a built-in Cassandra backend for your persistent entities. And then this is where the second part comes in. We're really focused on what we think is the correct way to build these services. We do not want people building them with CRUD-based monolithic data stores that are then going to be shared among multiple services. We think isolation is the key, not the size of the service. Microservices is a terrible name. We want people to be focused on isolation. You should not expose anything about your service beyond the API that people call. And that should impose no dependencies on them that they have to follow to make sure that they're compliant with your API. And that's why you see REST being such a success, because people are able to just make HTTP calls, right? The only real concerns are things such as service discovery and gateways and versioning and stuff like that. But those are more implementation details than they are whether or not you are able to decouple these services.
Yes.
You want your teams to be able to operate independently. You cannot have shared libraries between them. You do not want to have anything like util or miscellaneous or core as a shared library of dependencies that just represents a mishmash of garbage that all gets pulled in by all these different services. And this is what Ben Christensen was talking about on microservices.com on his talk, trying to make sure that you're going to be able to upgrade something like Guava across all these services whenever you have shared libraries. It's a mess. Don't do that, right? Don't share a database. Every service should have its own data store with its own schema that is not shared by anybody else. The only way to access that data is through the service. These kind of ideals are how we think people will build scalable software. And by scalable, I don't just mean being able to handle all these requests, but scalable across your teams.
Okay, organizationally.
Exactly. And that's our goal. That's where we want to take people. And we'll see if we're right. It's a very opinionated approach. And Logom, you can turn these things off. But we're going to make it hard on you. We really want you to follow this model. And this is on the front end. There's going to be a lot of companies out there who say, no, I don't want to do that. And I'm going to say, fine, go use Spring Boot. I don't care. But
we're
we
going to ask Chris Richardson about that.
Yeah, whatever. Go use it. It's fine. It's a great tool. As long as you like servlet-based interactions and, CRUD-based databases. These are things that we think are anti-patterns, especially at scale. You want transactions, you're doing it wrong.
How do you share the API definitions? Can you at least can I ask to share the API definition between the services so they're all on the same page? Okay.
Absolutely, and I'll show that today.
Okay.
Where I can bundle up using SBT. And mind you, this is one of the tricky things for us, right? We don't want to be a company building a build tool.
Yes.
But the things we can do with SBT that allow us to wire things together, such as the developer experience in Logom, in Play, is so powerful that we can't move off of it. We had really heated discussions about what we were going to do for Maven. We wanted to support Maven as much as possible, and we simply couldn't the way we want to. So with SBT, we can sit there and wire together a bunch of services as a single deployment footprint, and it sounds like I'm saying monolith, but it's only a monolith from the perspective of my build file.
Yes.
right? It's not the deployment itself. It's all going out there independently
Yes.
using tools like Conductor.
Yes.
And then you're able to, say run all, and everything just runs. And it exposes it through, maybe you've got a Play framework or Spring Boot or whatever, RESTful API that you can then call, and then everything behind it is using streaming, asynchronous APIs as opposed to this request response kind of stuff. You don't want that everywhere.
In terms of Maven, I've just been at the type level Northeast Scala conference, so there is this new tool called CBT, which Chris Fogg just wrote, and
Chris
it supports
Voigt,
Maven, and it's kind of funny to see, he basically said he rewrote Maven in 30 lines of Scala, which does, 95% of it, so hopefully, maybe next year, the community kind of around it matures, and, there'll be an interesting thing, but that's a great thing about Scala, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
we have a lot of different things, and community can kind of help.
And Chris studied at the EPFL. He was part of the TypeSafe team as an intern for a long period of time, working on Slick.
Yep.
So, we have a great relationship with him, and we're absolutely excited to see what he does with CBT. I mean, this is all part of having a vibrant ecosystem. And, like I said, if people want to use Gradle, we're all for that, whatever. That doesn't bother us, right? We want people to be successful. That's what's important, building software that works.
Cool. So I'm very excited about the new developments. Right, I think this is gonna be the tide which is gonna lift all the boats.
Yeah.
And so we're looking forward to your tech talk. And thank you very much for coming.
You bet.
Thanks.